mai, haere mai. Welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. My name is Jason Heel. I'm the Communications Manager at Maxim Institute, and this is our weekly short-form podcast. These podcasts are released in tandem with our weekly column and are a chance for you to hear in-depth from the column's author about some of the thinking that went into producing their final piece. Today we talk to Maxim researcher Alapasita Pomelile about her recent column. Ala, welcome back to the podcast this week. Great to have you.
Feels like it's been a while. Thanks for having me, Jace.
No worries. This week we're talking about your recent column, Attendance Officers Are Back, but is it too little too late? You make the point in your column that the package sounds promising. We've got attendance officers, they're back, but you say that it's a reheated policy in an election year. Can you just expand on that for us a little bit? What does that mean, that we've got a reheated policy? How old is it before it was reheated? And what are the ingredients, you know?
Yes, we'll get there. But before we get there, I guess a bit of context with this package. It comes out of a school attendance package they announced a couple of weeks back, which totals at $74 million. And part of that package is putting money towards 82 new attendance officer roles. This sounds familiar because they're formerly truancy officers. I'm sure in your heyday you had truancy officers. That was the threat.
Yeah,
we had truancy
officer
officers
will come and get you.
too. That's right. And the reason
we're not that much different in age.
I wasn't insinuating either. I'm just saying you're still young. With these truancy officers, what they've done is they've essentially rebranded them as attendance officers, I guess to sound less punitive. Even though they've still got officer in there. But reheated in the sense that these roles existed, I think, in the 2010, 2013. So they were always in schools up until that point. What has happened since is that, and they used to be in schools, what has happened since 2013 is that they've taken those roles outside of schools, outside of that local context, and they've outsourced them to what they call attendance services. So they're, I guess, the big brother of attendance officers, and these services don't sit in schools. They don't often come from that community, so it's hard to know, which would make sense why the Ministry of Education doesn't know how many attendance officers there are or what...
Because it's a whole separate division in many ways?
It's contracted. So they sit outside of the school domain. I think it was a cost-cutting measure at the time, and so that model currently still exists as attendance services, but now they're bringing back this idea of going back to the local, so reinstating attendance officers within schools, which means schools get to pick who these attendance officers are. I guess they get to come from their own community, so there's, I guess, more of an interplay between that role, the person in the role, and the context they're operating in. So it's nothing new under the sun, it's just... They've rebranded it,
just
rehashed
shifted it from outside to inside the school, and so essentially turned the clock back like 10 years?
10, 13 years. So it's kind of just recycled back like fashion trends do. So this seems like the fashionable thing to do in an election year is reheat policies, because innovative policy thinking is lacking in this country.
Well, you say that truancy is a pressing issue, but it doesn't get a lot of airtime in the news. And when it does, it seems that we're pretty indifferent. Like we kind of, you quote one news article as saying like, it's a problem and it's kind of increasing, but there's always the but. Most kids are still attending school, and so we shouldn't really worry about it. So why do you think we have this kind of indifference to what clearly is a big problem in our country?
I think it hasn't been an overnight thing. I feel like it's been an attitude or a posture we've kind of just accumulated over time, since probably 2010, 2015 is when we started to see the numbers creep up with truancy. I think also COVID sort of heightened this idea of sacrificing education in light of other more pressing and obviously makes sense, pandemic, etc., but education has always seemed to be the sacrificial lamb, and that's education plus our children. So I think because it isn't necessarily an imminent issue for people, because they often the thinking I think anecdotally is that children are resilient, so they'll bounce back, but we've got more
and
pressing
it's not
things.
impacting like the cost of living right now.
Correct,
It's not driving the economy or inflation. We can put it on the back burner a little bit.
Yeah, the issue is that it's been on the back burner for about 10 to 20 years. So I'm trying to figure out, anyways, it's always been an issue that's been kicked down the track. And I think it's a combo of just, it's complex, it's overwhelming. Where do you start? But I think also, I don't know, I wonder if it speaks to how much we value children in our society today. I think that's probably maybe something more symptomatic is our attitude towards truancy is perhaps a reflection of our attitude of how our role of the place of children in our society.
Yeah, fascinating how we've kind of devalued, in a sense, the most valuable, the future of our society in doing that. Well, it's a complex problem. It's multifaceted. We're going to need lots of different policy to kind of fix this problem.
Correct.
What are some of the suggestions that you would have that obviously there's no silver bullet, there's no one policy that's going to fix it, but what could we do that would mitigate some of the trend, the downward trend in attendance?
As I said in my column, attendance officers are a nice start, but it's going to take more. Yeah. And we know that for a child's education, it isn't just the school that's in play. It's everybody, from parents to the community to churches to sports clubs to all sort of like your intermediate associations in a society. But I think what we tend to overlook is the preventative measures that we can put into place, and that's sort of looking at the primary school or early childhood part of a learner's education journey. And so we're things from year 1 to year 8, we should really focus on putting measures into place when we start to see truancy come into the fold, as opposed to waiting till high school. Yeah.
So now, these attendance officers are only in high schools, are they?
We don't know. Yeah. We don't know. We just know there's 82 of them.
Yeah. But 82 for 2,000 schools.
I know. The math doesn't quite work out, but I'm praying that some policy analyst somewhere in Wellington figures out a sort of traffic light model to where these attendance roles go. But currently where the truancy rates sit as a majority of the chaos, or where work needs to happen is in high school. And primary school is creeping up too. Yeah. But I think in order to prevent what happens down the tracks in high school, we need to look at what's happening in the primary school end of things. So we should be able to put in more programs around, mental health is starting to creep up for young children, devices, etc. So we need to start putting in sort of, in some ways, like traffic light models that they're risk indicators.
Where's the really
red
urgent zones,
amber, and then green. Yeah. And so I think if we can get to them before they become chronic truant students, and that often we've got 8 years, we can catch them in those 8 years. It's doable, and some models overseas in mainly OECD countries, they start at the primary school end of things because they know if they can nip it in the butt there, they'll prevent further harm down the track. So I think we need to peel it back, look at early learning, look at primary school, and what are some of the things we can put into place to start figuring out who is at risk of truancy, and what are some of this probably more support programs in-house in schools that we can do to get students back into the classroom or back on track with loving learning. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Ala, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And now let's hear from Ala as she reads her column.
Truancy officers are back, this time rebranded as attendance officers. According to the Ministry of Education, they're going back to basics on attendance by resourcing those on the ground. And it's going to take $37.6 million of government funding. This funding is part of a $74 million school attendance package to establish 82 new attendance officer roles. Other package features include $28.4 million towards increasing the capacity of attendance services and $7.73 million towards improving a standardised system for attendance data collection and analysis. This package sounds promising, but we are presented with a reheated policy in an election year. Considering the Ministry of Education doesn't know how many attendance officers there are in schools or how much money is being spent on them, this is alarming. How will a policy throw more money at, yes, necessary attendance services, yet fail at the basic levels of monitoring these services? Truancy is a pressing issue, but it appears that indifference is the norm when it comes to tackling it. One news article described truancy as worsening and chronic, but most children are still going to school most of the time. In other words, truancy exists, but most of our children attend school, so it is neither dire nor urgent. The trouble is that the truancy data is too disastrous to ignore. Recent data shows that truancy rates have reached their highest level in the past decade. 46% of school children attend school regularly, attend 90% of a 10-week school term. This begs the question, what is happening to the 54% of school children that don't attend school regularly? Recently released Term 3 data shows chronic absenteeism, which is attending class 70% or less, is at 12.8%, up from 8.8% in the same term in 2001 and 7.4% in 2019. Our truancy dilemma has been a long-standing issue that continues to be kicked down the track for the next generation to fix. Every election year, it surfaces only to be met with junk food policies. They look and sound and may appear nice, but they need more substance. Truancy, without a doubt, is complex and therefore requires multifaceted policy solutions, like more targeted support for schools to implement preventive measures for learners at risk of chronic truancy. Sometimes the school and learning environment is unsuitable for a learner with attendance issues, so why don't we invest more in alternative education pathways? We say we recognise the importance of the teacher-student relationship. Still, we have not implemented policies or provided ongoing funding to support teachers in addressing the learning loss caused by pandemic disruptions. Research shows that truancy is associated with poor educational outcomes, unemployment, reduced future learning capacity, drug involvement, and criminal activity. Truancy is like a disease that spreads its sickness through various aspects of society. Interventions are needed at the individual, family, school, and community levels. Attendance officers are an excellent start, but more is required to ensure no child is left behind.
Thanks for listening to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us and keep up with the rest of our research and analysis of politics and policy in New Zealand, you can sign up on the homepage of our website to get our monthly forum email and invitations to future Maxim Institute events. You can search and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā, goodbye for now.